Hey guys, happy Friday morning, Friday night, Saturday morning. I guess it depends on where you live. So there's so much to cover, and I know I promised you guys a video where you're going to see my face and my facial expressions, but there's just too much to cover in this, and I know you guys all know about Brendan's denial. It does not surprise me in the least. It's not going to surprise me when Zellner gets denied too, and it's for all the reasons that I keep stating. And the Supreme Court made it very, very clear, or not the Supreme Court, United States Court of Appeals made it extremely clear of what I keep saying over and over and over, that they just don't have the jurisdiction to overturn. And unless there's an error in the law, it is not getting overturned. Stephen is not going to see the light of day. I don't care if you guys don't like it. I don't care if you guys get mad at me. Whoops, I'm on the wrong page. I don't care if you guys get mad at me for it. Facts are facts. So my apologies, but it is what it is. Okay? Now, you guys can see all my things. I didn't even realize that. All right, let me just close everything out. Boop. All right. So let's get right into it, all right? First things first is principal issue in this habeas corpus appeal is whether the finding was based on an unreasonable application of Supreme Court precedent or an unreasonable view of the facts. States exactly what I've been trying to tell you guys. And that is exactly what I just said. No reason to repeat it. Many other factors. This I did not know until tonight, and if I did know, I completely forgot. But I didn't realize that when they talked about that he waived his Miranda warnings or Miranda rights, I didn't know that he signed them away. And like I said, if I did know, I totally forgot. That's not good. And the fact that Barb allowed it is even more sickening. So then it goes on to say investigators made no specific promises of leniency, which is like, sure they did. I'm trying not to curse, but they definitely did. And I think it's absolutely horrible that that's the way it's going in there. So then it goes on to say something that I highlighted just for these two words, we granted. It also goes on to say that they don't have to accept the case. This is what I was saying about Stephen. If they wanted to deny it, they could easily deny it. A lot of you guys fought me on it and said I was crazy. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not crazy. I give you real facts. And they're real facts the way the stuff works. So then it goes on a little. It says they talk about whether they want to accept habeas corpus petitions. Goes on to say, provides that a state court conviction cannot be overturned unless state court's adjudication of a federal claim on the merits, and it gives the reasons why. In general, that means that odds are they're not overturning convictions. I have stated this over and over and over, and unfortunately, it's the same thing that's going to happen to Stephen. If you want to read it, I'm not going to go through all of it, but if you want to read it, it's on page 4. It's very small of what will make them overturn it, and neither one of these fit either one, Brendan or Stephen. So then it goes on to say the issue is not whether federal judges agree with the state court decision or even whether the state court decision was correct. That is huge, huge to understand, because even if they think Stephen is innocent, they can only go by what case law has been proven previously. And case law has proven that there was nothing technically wrong with either one of their cases. I can guarantee you, and I hate to say it, but I can guarantee you Stephen's case, Stephen's answer is going to be the exact same thing. There was absolutely no errors in the law. And then they go on to say, they explain it all. So basically, in summary, if the state court decision looks reasonable, then the higher courts will uphold the decision. This is just how the law works. There's no major errors. That's all they have to go on. Right here is still, it's standard law 101, right or wrong, it's how it works. And it really does work 95% of the time. There is 5% they get it wrong, but 95% of the time it is correct. We're on page 6. They explain it again. It's almost like they really want you to understand it, but it's, once again, they're saying that their hands are basically tied and that it really doesn't matter what their opinions are. The only thing that matters is that if there was an error in the actual law. If there wasn't, you're kind of shit out of luck. So they pretty much like really nail that in. And in this one, they're also giving that same thing, and they're discussing all the tactics that can be determined to be coerced, or yeah, coerced confession. However, in my opinion, and as Laura's, as per her last live brief or live debate or whatever you want to call it, they're referring to adults. I also think it's relative, meaning that what a 16-year-old challenge kid may find to be exhausting mentally may be a walk in the park for me. So I personally feel that it's a completely unfair and biased statement because honestly, I mean, think about that. What is good for one may not be easy for another. So this one took me a couple of times to understand. I mean, I kept reading it and really wasn't sure. But I think I finally got it. So what they're saying is any direct or implied promises as a standalone does not render the confession involuntary. However, if it's involuntary when it's mixed with promises to protect suspect against violence, then it becomes involuntary. They give case law for it. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but that's generally what it's saying. They give an example down here that false promises may be evidence of involuntariness, at least when paired with coercive practices or especially vulnerable defendants as part of the totality of the circumstances. That seems to be their favorite word throughout this entire answer, is totality of the circumstances. I really wish they would use their own totality of the circumstances and come up with a better conclusion. So let's skip down to page 10. And yeah, I'm going through this kind of fast just because there's a lot of pages. So it says we have reservations about the use of suggestibility as a factor in this analysis, at least on these facts. Dassey relies heavily on the results of the Good-Johnson, I don't even know how to say it, suggestibility scale test, measuring him more susceptible to fabrication than 95 people out of 100. 5% wouldn't, he's more susceptible than 95% of people out there. But yet, here's what is amazing to me. In any event, the state's expert forcefully contested both the administration and meaning of Dassey's test at trial. Therefore, we cannot draw conclusions from this disputed result. So even though it's in there, even though they're looking at it, they can't do shit about it. They can't rule on it. They can't use it to make a judgment. This is where the laws need to change. Because if they're putting it in their brief, they should be able to use it. It is so important that, I mean, how is that not able to do something? And the reason why it can't is because it is not, it's not something that was used at trial court, so they can't use it. And I get that. I get that's the way the law works. But the fact that Len, the asshole, didn't fight this or didn't throw this out or allowed this to not be acceptable in trial court speaks volumes as to what kind of attorney he was. To me, logical conclusion, that alone teeters towards ineffective counsel because he did not do what he was supposed to do as an attorney. That whole confession should have been thrown out if he was any fuck of an attorney. So, oops, I cursed. So it's just that this right here really, really bothered me a lot. I mean, it's just like, boom, there it is. So now moving on, this next part burns me because it says on October 31st, her last appointment of the day was at Avery's Auto Salvage. And the reason why it burns me is because on the November 4th, I'm positive it was November 4th, interview with Brendan, one of the officers clearly states this was not her last appointment, that she had other appointments to go to. Why can't anyone just listen to that interview? The state made it her last appointment to fit their narrative. Why they don't see that, I don't know. It's when I read that, it just burns me because it goes back to what an a-hole Len is. this bothered me a lot too. And this had to do with the Miranda waiver, and his mom consented, though she did not sit in. What kind of mother allows their 16-year-old to waive a Miranda waiver? I can totally see it if no one in that family, including her, had ever been arrested, but that's not the case. She was arrested. Her boyfriend at the time had been arrested multiple times. What a piece of crap she is. And honestly, there is zero excuse. Zero. It's disgusting. And Wiegert and Fassbender obtained his mother's permission for yet another interview. She's such a great mom. I mean, honestly, wonderful mom. Most innocent adults would think that this is nothing either. When it says in the car, the investigative desk and Miranda warnings about his right to remain silent, his right to an attorney, a possibility that statements he gave could be used against him. Even with adults, if you're innocent, you may waive it too, because you're going to think that you have nothing to hide, that you're not under arrest. And they kept saying that he wasn't under arrest. So here they go on to, because he didn't fully understand them, and they knew that. And I strongly, strongly believe that. Again, at no point in the interview, the investigators threatened Dassey or his family, nor did they attempt to intimidate him physically. They didn't have to. He didn't know any better. And that's what I don't understand, the logic. I get the law. Believe me, I've been preaching it. But there has to be some sort of logic there too. I understand the law is written one way, but you have to have logic. And logic states he didn't know any better. He was a 16-year-old kid. I'm not saying he was dumb, but he was a 16-year-old kid with an IQ of below average. Nothing more needs to be said. He may not have understood, and he was never in trouble with the law. They're comparing him with somebody that's like been in trouble with the law, and that's not fair. So let's go down to page 15. This just goes into his stuff that we know already. In the first hour, Dassey admitted that he received a phone call from Avery, went over to Avery's garage in the 6 o'clock hour, and found Teresa already dead in her car. Dassey then said he helped Avery lower Teresa's bound body into a creeper, which used to work underneath an automobile, which he and Avery used to take her body outside and throw her onto the already burning fire. Okay. In that statement alone, let's just pick it apart a little. In the first hour, Dassey admitted that he received a telephone call from Avery, went over to Avery's garage in the 6 o'clock hour. Okay, fine. Found Teresa already dead. So, okay, if you believe this statement, then he had nothing to do with the murder. Then he found Teresa already dead in her car. Okay. Dassey then said he helped Avery lower Teresa's bound body onto a creeper, which he and Avery used to take her body outside, and throw her onto an already burning bonfire. So this statement itself makes no sense. Take her outside? What, outside of the car? It just doesn't make any sense. Why would you need to lower her at all? It's retarded to me. She's dead. Stephen, I think, could carry her if she was that small and thin. I mean, it was just stupid. If you really read it, it doesn't even make sense. So then it goes on saying Dassey's telling, which we all know there's no evidence to back up any of it. Moving on, it says portion of Dassey's confession also led to another search to Stephen Avery's garage that uncovered perhaps the most powerful physical evidence of the investigation, a bullet fragment with Teresa Halbach's DNA. Surprise, surprise. A year later, they just happen to find a fragment. This is a man that cleaned up so well, but happens to find a bullet fragment on the floor. You okay? So, let's move on. It goes on to a bunch of stuff from from their speaking. And we're going to skip through that. Go to page 21. Okay. Dassey was taken into custody after this interview, which he now contends was involuntary and should not have been used at trial. Absolutely. His lawyer's fault for that. If Dassey had continued to cooperate in a case against Stephen Avery, this might well have worked in his favor. At the 2010 post-conviction hearings, Dassey's lawyer, piece of shit that he was, and the prosecutor, good old Kane Kratz, both indicated the state could have advocated for more lenient punishment for Dassey if he had testified against Stephen Avery. So you're going to send a kid away, 16-year-old kid, for the rest of his life, or 30 years, because he didn't do what you asked him to do. Think about that for a second. I get the way the law works, but this is not your ego, Kratz. This is somebody's life. And you have screwed somebody's life who, even if you believe the first story that wasn't coerced, and that very first story that there was a body, and they, that he helped Stephen, he didn't murder him. He had nothing to do with the murder, if you believe the first story. So why are you sending this kid away for life? Because he didn't kiss your ass, Kratz? God, that pissed me off when I read that. You have no idea. So then it goes on. At trial, Dassey gave no explanation, blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing. At trial, going back to the state trial, and it was a travesty of a trial to begin with, as we all know, but that's all they have to go on. So then it goes on, and it says, where are we? Page 23. Oh, I went ahead. All right. As the parties stipulated, Dassey's Miranda waivers from both days, the judge found that Dassey knew he could stop answering questions and knew he could leave the room at any time on February 27th, and that he repeatedly indicated his continuing interest in speaking with the police on March 1st. Come on, really? Who really wants to sit there and talk to the police? Give me a break. I don't believe that at all. I think that's complete bogus. And a real attorney would have done something about this in court. Can these people really think that someone that just committed a murder is just willingly interested in sitting there speaking to the police? Get the fuck out of here. Dumbest thing I ever read. And they have to be able to use some sort of common sense. They just have to. Then it says, based on those findings, we also conclude that Dassey has not shown coercion. Come on. I get it from the legal standpoint. I totally do. But even taking a legal standpoint, I'll agree with that it didn't show coercion according to the law. But on the flip side, the confession should have never been in the courts to begin with. A decent lawyer tries to throw out any confession. Does even a decent lawyer, a public defender, tries to throw out a confession because they want their client to be free. But Len was so far up Kratz's ass that it was all about making Kratz happy. And that's proven from offering the deal. Well, Kratz basically said point out blank, well, he didn't do what we wanted. If he would have done what we wanted, we would have given him leniency. Why is this about what you want, Kratz? How about make it about this kid's life? But of course, Kratz wouldn't think like that. He's too much of a narcissist. So let's move forward. Moving forward. And now we're on one of my favorite parts, 27. We go to page 27. Boop. Dassey was not subject to physical coercion of any sort or threats at all. Given the history of coercive interrogation techniques from which modern constitutional standards for confessions emerged, this is important. But they are comparing hardened criminal interrogations as compared to a 16-year-old who has never had a run-in with the law. This is what it reminded me of. You can't compare apples and tomatoes and say that they're both red, they are both fruit, and therefore they must be handled in the exact same way. No, they are totally different and must be handled differently. So if you take an apple and throw it against the wall, it's going to pop off. Try taking a tomato and throwing it against the wall. You got a mess to clean up. I understand that there's guidelines. I do. I totally get it. However, those guidelines were written 50 years ago. The law needs to be updated, which is the premise of my entire video. it can't stay this way. It's not good for anybody. I mean, honestly, it's not. So let's move on. Boop. Again, earlier I said that they keep talking about totality of the circumstances. They have used this term like 30 times. Let's address the totality of the circumstances. Clearly showed that he was lying. Why can I say that? Because there's no evidence to back up what he said, not one piece of it. And quite honestly, that's the totality of the circumstances. I mean, it is. So let's move on to page 30. It took me a lot longer to do than it's actually going through. So they also talk about Dask's confession was voluntary in the eyes of the law. So since we're looking at the eyes of the law, please show me where someone is sitting in jail for life when there is not one shred of evidence to support the crime. Again, any decent attorney, even a shitty attorney, would get that confession thrown out because there is absolutely zero evidence to base that on. Zero. There's no evidence against Brendan. None. The only thing you have is a confession. Halfway decent attorney chucks the confession and then you have no case. But Len was working for the state, not his client. So it's just a sad fact, and it's a travesty all around. I mean, it really is. So moving on, I decided to, since I didn't look up all the case law, but just certain ones that I had, because they were comparing his case to others, and I have like 2 pages on it, so I decided to look up both cases. And I did some research and learned that they were very similar in certain aspects, except this guy was on death row. And it happened in 1964 when the crime was committed. Have the laws not evolved since 1967? And if they haven't, don't you think that's a problem? Have we not grown as a society since 1967? I mean, it was actually Alabama. It was like 20 minutes from me, if not. It was in Decatur. And the other one that I read that they quote down here, the key difference, this guy was a hardened criminal, but they actually write that. I don't know where, but they have it somewhere in here that he was a criminal. And the 2 things that make this different, both of these people were fighting about Miranda rights. The one in 67, because Miranda rights didn't exist yet, he was the case that had the Miranda rights. And this one, I think I read, wasn't given his Miranda rights something, but both of those were fighting for Miranda rights. He wasn't fighting for Miranda rights. So, I mean, that's where the law gets tricky. I don't see how they can use that as a definitive. This one says, Wisconsin court decision here was unreasonable within the meaning of blah, blah, blah. As in Michael C., the police had indicated that a cooperative attitude would be to the suspect's benefit, but their remarks in this regard were far from threatening or coercive. I disagree with that. And here's why. And Michael C.'s case was in California. California laws are totally different. It's apples and tomatoes again, because in this case, like I said, it was California. Cali has different rules, and he had a criminal record. These are completely different circumstances. Therefore, you can't conclude the exact same result from totally different circumstances. You just can't do it. I mean, that's logic, life 101. I don't care what the Supreme Court says. You just can't do it. And if you are going to do it, you at least have to have it in the same state. So they said that they merely encouraged honesty and did not promise leniency. They wouldn't have promised leniency if they weren't arresting him or charging him in his eyes. No one ever said these cops were stupid. But again, this should have been thrown out in trial court, but his attorney was working against him. That's a fact that none of these judges are recognizing or want to recognize, and that's frustrating, like seriously frustrating. So then it goes on to talk about the rest of the trial. And on page 38, there is... All right, 38, it goes on to say the majority. Now, here is the actual ruling on that. A defendant alleging ineffective counsel generally must demonstrate a reasonable probability that but for counsel's unprofessional errors, the result of the proceeding would have been different. This is where I disagree with the courts. Because if you have a real attorney, yes, the outcome would have been different. This is logic 101. Because again, I've said this 6 times already. With a real attorney, they would have had the confession thrown out because there's no evidence to back up his confession. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to know that, and the fact that they're ruling this and not seeing that picture is mind-blowing to me. I can't for the life of me understand how they don't see it. Yes, the outcome would have been different. Not in Stephen's case. Stephen's case, the outcome would not have been different. There's evidence against him. There's actual DNA. There's blood. Whatever you want to put it, there's no getting around that. Brendan, on the other hand, there is getting around that. I mean, there's ways around that. And it's sickening to me that they can't just look at that and say, you know what? There would have been a different outcome, and most likely he would have been enjoying his life. Not Stephen, but Brendan. So that's what I have for you guys tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you heard the whole thing, and make sure you check out my other videos. And it is now 12:45, and I'm going to bed because it's late. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you check out my other videos, and I promise, next video, you'll see my face, okay? And that's it. Have a great night. Peace.